Cool. Welcome everybody. This is the NZPFU. I'm Wattie Watson. I'm the National Secretary of the NZPFU. We represent the professional firefighters of New Zealand, across New Zealand. We also represent people that work in FENS and other roles, including the communications centre, the emergency centres that you ring in when you need assistance from fire, police or ambulance. We represent people that go into the community to ensure that businesses and organisations and buildings are compliant and safe. We have people that go into schools and educate children and others about fire safety. We have professional trainers in our midst, and we have a number of people whose job it is to go out and support the volunteer firefighters. With us today is Professor Rod Jackson. Thanks very much for your time, Professor Jackson.
What You're very welcome.
We, as a union, we were very conscious of a lot of information and conversations going on out there about COVID-19, about the impact on New Zealand and our health services, and about the vaccination that's available. And we offered an opportunity to our membership to bring forward any questions they might have that they would like a professional to answer, and to get the conversation, perhaps some information that they haven't had before. We've also got on the call today Jaron Phillips. Jaron is used to work in the comm centres for FENS, and he is an integral part of the NZPFU communications team, and he's assisting me. I'm a bit of a Luddite, and he will be helping us get this video underway, and also make sure we can then post it on our various social media from which you're watching it today. So Professor Rod Jackson, poor Professor Jackson, I gave him a call out of the blue and explained who we were and what we wanted to do. And he has very willingly, and we really appreciate the personal time that he's generously given to working with us to put today together, and also to actually answer the questions today. So I was surprised.
Can I just say, please call me Rod. I only answer to Rod. The professor's just my job. It's so I'm Rod to everybody.
Very cool. So Rod, we didn't expect as many questions as we got. I was amazed with the scope, the depth and the work some people had put into the questions that we've got before you today. So I think we can't possibly cover them all. So I think perhaps the way forward, Rod, would be first for you to introduce yourself and your background. And I've got a couple of specific questions then for you on you personally that have come from the floor. And then we'll talk about the vaccine, the virus, mandatory vaccination, and then cover some of the specific questions that we have. Mm-hmm. Cool. Would you just like to let everyone know who you are and where you come from and why this is one of your passions?
Okay, well, where I come from a farm out of Dargaville on the west coast. I was born in a place called Tikopuru, which has a public library the same size as most people's toilets. But I grew up north, and then I went to medical school in the early 1970s, and worked as a doctor until the early 1980s, when I went to spend a year in epidemiology at the University of Auckland, and I got sucked in and never went back to full-time clinical practice. Indeed, I did a little bit of clinical practice for a while, but I've been working in epidemiology for over 40 years, mainly in New Zealand, mainly in Auckland, but also in the US, and also at the University of Oxford in the UK. And so my work is mainly about understanding, making sense of data, like the data we're dealing with right now in the pandemic, about COVID-19 and vaccines. And my areas of expertise, most of my research is actually in heart disease and predicting who's going to have a heart attack. But my other main area of expertise is understanding, interpreting, making sense, deciding what data is valid. And I been teaching in Oxford, University of Oxford, for the last 20 years. I teach the teachers of something called evidence-based medicine. What is the evidence that we should use to make decisions, and how good is that evidence? And the other thing is, I've always worked on a salary. I've never been funded by any drug company or anything. In fact, a lot of drug companies are not particularly happy with me because I was involved in getting rid of an asthma drug that we believe was killing people in the 1980s in New Zealand. I've been very involved in working around making sure that statins, cholesterol-lowering drugs, are only given to people at high risk. I was also very involved in the smoke-free legislation that New Zealand has. So I've had quite a long involvement in making policy for New Zealanders based on the evidence. And there's a question that I guess you're going to ask me, but I'm going to throw it in here, is that I'm, as well as being an epidemiologist, I'm a public health doctor. So I'm a member of the college, the New Zealand College of Public Health Medicine. So I'm a doctor I see every one of your members and you two as my patients, because I'm a population doctor who's responsible for the health of New Zealanders. And as a very famous pathologist said almost 100 years ago, medicine is a social science and politics is just medicine on a large scale. So in medicine, one of the questions was, how can we trust someone who has a political role? Well, in fact, the way population health doctors communicate with their patients is through politics. And so politics and medicine are very, very closely aligned. The reason we have median barriers on the Auckland Harbour Bridge is because of a pathologist, the coroner's pathologist at Auckland Medical School, who saw so many people getting killed on the Harbour Bridge. He was behind that. Our seatbelt legislation is because of doctors. Our speed limit is because of doctors. Our the alcohol limits that you're allowed to drink, it's all because of doctors. So doctors have a huge and a very long history in working with politicians to introduce a whole lot of, with laws and mandates to keep people safe. So that's my background, Wattie.
That's brilliant. So
and does that answer? I think that might answer one of those questions about.
It does answer the second. The first one, I suppose, is
the conflicts of interest.
Yeah, conflicts of interest. I think it's always a good question to put up front.
Yeah.
Do you have any conflicts of interest in terms that might sway your opinion on vaccinations?
Yep. So could you maybe give me some, because I tell you, firstly, I work on a salary. I've never been funded by any drug company. I had heard of Pfizer before last year, but I don't even know what drugs they produce. The only drug I know they produce now is the Pfizer vaccine. I've always, as I say, I've always worked for a university or a hospital. I've never worked in private practice. During the pandemic, I have to continue doing my day job. So I now start at between 3:30 and 4:30 in the morning, 7 days a week. I've worked, and you can talk to my wife and she'll tell you that, the hours in my day have ended by 6 to 8 hours in addition to my usual job. And as I said, I work 7 days a week and I have not received a cent extra. In fact, I've had to pay for extra time on my phone because I spend half my time on the phone. And so my usual phone bill doesn't cover my phone. So I have no conflicts of interest in terms of monetary. Is there anything else, Wattie, that you could think of, just if you have questions about what could be conflicts of interest?
So you're not commissioned or contracted by the government in any way?
I receive nothing from the government. I'm not commissioned. I work for the university. As I said, I work for the University of Auckland. They keep at complete arm's length from me. In fact, I was just complaining to one of my colleagues the other day that there's no one in the leadership of the university that's actually saying, I think you're doing a good job or a bad job. They've been silent. So the university actually keeps very much at arm's length from the academics. And the only thing that they challenge you on is if you say something that you can't back up by evidence.
Right.
That's what universities, that's really the only way that they can kind of, I guess, challenge academics, is if they believe that what you say is not based on evidence.
Well, I think that's a pretty transparent start to today, and I think therefore people have a very good idea of who we are and who you are. So let's crack on.
Yeah.
So I think one of the ways to perhaps deal with the scope and wealth of questions that we have is maybe if you just have a statement to start with, in terms of there's so much information out there, Rod, on the nature of various vaccines, on the issue of I've never met a COVID-19 denier, so I think they're probably very few and far between.
I think you're right.
I've never met them in our membership. But in terms of the impact of COVID on the individuals, as well as the health system and the community as a whole. So do you want to just have a bit of an overview statement on where you're coming from in terms of vaccinations and the COVID-19 strains?
Yeah. So it's really about the vaccine and the virus, which I think is that, and right up front, obviously if you're looking at this on a video, you can see it says I'm double jabbed. And I wore this t-shirt specifically today just to be absolutely clear that I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I would not expect you to do anything that I wouldn't do. Okay. And I wouldn't be double jabbed if I was concerned about, if I thought that the harms of the vaccine outweighed the benefits, I wouldn't have got jabbed. And I'm one of the world's experts in understanding that evidence. I would challenge anyone in the world actually to say that they can interpret the evidence, the trial evidence about the benefits and harms of vaccines any more than me. There'd be a group of us who are in the same level. But anyway, so that's the starting point. So let me just tell you a little bit about the virus, and I'm going to talk to you about Delta, because everything pre-Delta is now irrelevant. Okay, Delta is the variant you've all heard about, and Delta has taken over the world of COVID. And the reason it's taken over is that it has this characteristic, which is called the R value of 6. And that simply means that left to its own devices, one person who is infected with COVID-19, with the Delta variant of COVID-19, on average, will infect 6 other people. And those 6 will infect 6 other people, and so on. So in about 3 to 4 cycles, you get over 1,000 cases of COVID-19, and that's Delta. So that's one component of Delta in that it is highly contagious, and it's also happens more quickly. So from the time someone who's infected is exposed to someone uninfected, by the time they get it and then passed on, that time has got shorter. So the spread, we talk about exponential spread, and that's, from a public health point of view, a disaster. When you have something that can go rapidly, okay? That's one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is that before vaccines, COVID was estimated to be at least 20 times more severe than the flu. 20 times more severe than the flu, okay? So if you get the flu, and many of us have had the flu, it varies from almost symptomless, you think you've got a cold, and at the other end of the spectrum, you're dead, okay? So it's a very wide spectrum, and it's identical with COVID, is that at one end of the spectrum, you almost have no symptoms or none. At the other end of the spectrum, you're dead. But without the vaccine, it's 20 times worse. So in New Zealand, for example, we have about 500 flu deaths per year, in that order. If New Zealand last year had the same COVID per head of population as the UK, United Kingdom, where most of us originate, a lot of us came from, we would have had 10,000 deaths. Okay, so last year in the UK, there were the equivalent for New Zealand of about 10,000. So 500 deaths from flu, 10,000 deaths from COVID, 20 times. That's where that number comes from. And that's all over the world, is that's the difference that you would get. So here you've got a disease that without a vaccine is 20 times worse than the flu. But this other characteristic, this R value of 6, the flu is 1.5. So on average, someone who gets the flu will infect 1.5 other people. Whereas with COVID, it's 6. Delta, it's 6, okay? And it's the combination of those two things, a disease that without a vaccine is 20 times worse than the flu, times this R value, that's what causes public health crises. Okay, that's what makes COVID so bad. It's that combination. Okay, so that's at a high level. So that's why people like me freak out about COVID. Okay, but let me just tell you now just a little bit about the virus and the vaccine, because I think this is really key. Okay, now you've all seen pictures of COVID-19. It's this ball with spikes on it. Little ball with spikes on it. Okay. That little ball has inside it something called RNA, which is 1/2 of DNA, but it's called an RNA virus. And that RNA strand, there's a strand of RNA in there that's 40,000 words long. 40,000 words long. They're called bases, but that's what it is. And that is a sorry, I'm not going to dispel it. Yeah. But this COVID-19 manual it's a manual that describes how to make more virus. It's self-replicating. Okay, it's in there inside that ball, and those spikes are designed to latch on to billions of cells around the body. Those spikes are a special shape that they lock on to. It's almost like the on a spaceship, on say the space station, there's some sort of, what do you call it? I want to call it a lock. It's a what's the word? Docking station. Yeah, docking station. Okay. Great. So the COVID virus is the perfect shape to stick onto and click into a docking station, a special docking station that is found on billions of cells all over the body, in the lungs, in the heart, in the brain, in the gut, in the blood vessels, in your testicles, if you're a male, in your ovaries, if you're a woman, all over the body, These docking stations on the cells are the perfect fit for the COVID-19 spike. And when that spike goes into the docking station, it injects genetic material. So if you get infected by COVID-19, you have billions of cells all over your body being injected by genetic material that self-replicates. So what it does, it goes into the cell, it takes over the factories of the cell, and it says to that factory, make me more virus. And it turns off the cell's control center, which is something called the nucleus, because the nucleus is normally sending out little bits of messenger RNA. So this is what normal cells do. They send out little bits of messenger RNA all the time saying, make me a bit of this, make me a bit of that, okay, make me a bit of this. And when the virus comes in, it stops all that. So the cell gets sick because it can't make its normal stuff. And instead, what the virus does, it says, make me more of me. Make me more. And so that's what happens with the virus. So this COVID-19 virus, and the reason it's so nasty is because it just by chance, it's developed this spike, which is the perfect shape for a docking station that is already on billions of cells through the body. Okay. So the cells get sick. The virus makes lots more, self-replicating. It's 40,000 word instruction manual, and then it spits out these more virus out of the cell and goes elsewhere in the body. Okay, that's the virus. The vaccine, what's special about the Pfizer vaccine, which is the champagne of vaccines, it is the world's most amazing, simplest, purest vaccine of all of the vaccines, okay? And what that vaccine is 4,000 of those 40,000 words. So the virus is 4,000 word long manual.
We're just losing you a little bit
is
there.
A 4,000 word.
Rod, we're just losing
Have you got me now?
there. So can you start again just where you were about what that vaccine is? You just faded in and out a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, so can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
You can, sorry. So whereas I said the virus is a 40,000 word instruction manual, the vaccine is a 4,000, not 40,000, a 4,000 word pamphlet that describes part of the shape of those spikes. Just a part of this. It can't replicate itself. All it does is it's a 4,000 word pamphlet as opposed to an instruction manual. And it is wrapped up in a little envelope of fat. It's wrapped up in a little envelope of fat. When it gets injected into your arm, it gets actively swallowed up by one type of cell in the body. Only it doesn't have any spikes on it. It's not live or anything. It's just this little message in a fat envelope that the body's defense mechanism says this is foreign, eats it up, and it tells each of those vaccine particles tells a cell, and it's only one type of cell, not billions, one type of cell. Could you make a couple of hundred parts of the spike, about 200 spikes, and then it's gone. It's gone completely. It can't self-replicate. Each particle makes about 200. I'm going to call them spikes, but it's not even the whole spike. It's only part of the spike. And then those spikes move to the outside of the special type of cell. It's called a defender cell. It's part of the body's immune system. And that defender cell, which now has some spikes sitting on the surface, it can't link to anything. They're just sort of sitting there. It uses those spikes on the surface to teach the body's immune system to recognize them. So in this whole process, it's designed to teach the body to be prepared if it sees the virus in future. And that's how it works. So the virus, 40,000 words, self-replicating genetic material that goes right through the body, through the lungs, the heart, the brain, the gut, the blood vessels, the uterus, testicle, everywhere, okay? Versus a 4,000 word pamphlet that goes into one type of cell in the body, mainly just in the arm. The vaccine is completely gone in 2 days. And actually the spikes are completely gone in 2 weeks, washed away, completely gone, nothing left after two weeks. And that's the difference between the vaccine and the virus. So if people are worried about being injected with genetic material, you should be worried about the virus. If because it's self-replicating, it can hang around whereas, so this is the difference. And this is the purest vaccine we have. A number of the other vaccines, the AstraZeneca and others that you would have heard of, actually, they take a virus, a cold virus, they make it what they call inert, they make it so it can't do any damage to you. And then they also modify the genes inside the virus. So all of these vaccines, except one, actually involve manipulating genetic material, but the Pfizer one is the purest and simplest. And it teaches your body how to respond next time the virus comes knocking. And the reactions, and you do get reactions. I mean, that's the whole thing. I remember when I got my first jab, I didn't feel it. And I said to the vaccinator, have you done it? And he said, yeah. I said, I didn't feel a thing. And so a couple of hours later, when my arm was sore, I was actually relieved. Okay. Now, mine was the normal reaction, which was in the arm. And because that was my immune system teaching itself that you need to be prepared for the virus. Now, occasionally, your immune system, some people have hyperactive immune systems. And so the people who react more are the people who have hyperreactive immune systems. And some of those people, interestingly, are the healthiest people. So some of the healthiest people actually do react to the vaccine more than unhealthy people, just because it's designed to prod your immune system interaction. Okay, so if that's the vaccine and the virus, that's the difference between them. And I talk to my colleagues around the world on a regular basis. I'm trying to learn from my colleagues in the UK. I talk to people in Ireland, which is a similar sized population to New Zealand, to my colleagues in Singapore, and my colleagues in Australia, which is where we should all be watching very carefully, particularly Australia and Singapore are two countries. And when I tell them, they say, oh, which vaccines do you have? And I said, oh, we only have the Pfizer. And they all say, oh my God, you're so lucky. How did you choose that one? What was the reason you chose that one? They say, I wish we had only had one vaccine and that one. So it's not only I wish we had one vaccine, they all wish they had that one. So that's the vaccine and virus. Now, I know you've got other questions, but I want to throw something else in right now that I think is very, very important. Every New Zealander, almost every, I won't say every, because if you live in a bubble in the bush, you might be okay. But with Delta, all of the evidence is suggesting that every New Zealander will either get the virus or the vaccine. Okay. And
or both.
Or both. And I'll come to, yes, no, and please butt in. That's a very good point. I'll come to that as well. So let me put it another way. So I'm going to say that, okay, so let's say that because it's good to say every New Zealander is either going to get the virus or the vaccine or both. And I'll come back to the both because that's very important. So actually, every New Zealander, or almost every New Zealander, you can never say every because there's always the exception. The 105-year-old woman who's smoked every day of her life since 12 and 8 and never got lung cancer. So they do exist. There are special people. But so you are all going to be vaccinated because there are two ways to get vaccinated. You can get vaccinated by the virus or you can get vaccinated by the vaccine. So you are all going to get vaccinated. And the choice, if you get vaccinated by the virus, remember what I said, billions of cells in your body are going to be injected with genetic material that is self-replicating. If you get vaccinated by the vaccine, one type of cell is going to produce a couple of hundred components that look like the spikes that are gone with the vaccine completely gone in 48 hours, the spikes completely gone in 2 days. So that's your choice. That's your choice. Now, if you get both, and whatever, this is a very good point. This is a very good point. What we've learned, and we keep on learning new things every day about the vaccine, which also depends on the variant that's out there, is that the vaccine, and pretty much all of them do this about the same, not quite, but about the same. Not the Sputnik. The Sputnik one doesn't seem to work very well. This is the Russian one. And the Chinese one we just don't know about that well. But the standard ones that are around in Western countries, the ones that you've heard of, they all reduce severe disease by about the same amount, which is about 95%. That's severe disease. That's where you need to go to ICU or die. Well, it's about as severe as you can get, obviously. So, but the very severe end, and that ability to reduce severe disease has not changed. It seems the reassuring thing that the vaccine has continued. So we've been giving the vaccine out now almost a year. It was in December that they started doing it on a large scale. So it's not quite a year, but the studies suggest that all of the studies suggest that the effectiveness of the vaccine on severe disease has not changed much. What has changed is the effectiveness of the vaccine on whether you get infected. Okay, so you can get infected by COVID and you can get severe disease with COVID. Okay, obviously you need to get infected first to get severe disease. What the vaccine does is, because it's primed your body to recognize those spikes, as soon as you get infected with the virus, that antibody system, that immune system is ready to go, and it stops that infection going beyond your lungs in about 95% of cases. Okay, so, and the other thing it does is that it does slow down whether you get infected. So if you meet someone who is infected and you're vaccinated, each time you come in contact with that person, you're less likely to be infected than someone who is unvaccinated. But it's nowhere near that 95. The 95% is for severe disease. The risk of being infected is actually reducing, which brings me, Wattie, to your point about getting both. Okay, what we're learning from Singapore, and it'll be interesting to see whether this happens in Australia as well, just a bit early. We almost wish they'd had their outbreak a couple of months earlier, but it would have given us, we would have learned a lot. But what happened in Singapore is that they had 90% plus of their population vaccinated by August. This is their 12 and over. And what has happened is that they are now experiencing COVID going right through their population, the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. But the unvaccinated have 30 times the chance at risk of dying compared with the vaccinated, and more than 10 times the risk of being hospitalized. And what they're, the way they're thinking about COVID infection in Singapore today is that they have a largely vaccinated population, and now that they're getting COVID on top of the vaccination, they see this as the natural booster to a vaccinated population. And they see this as the win-win, is that by being vaccinated, they're largely protected against severe disease, largely protected because it's 95% reduction in severe disease. But COVID coming in after they're vaccinated is what they're hoping, and it's still early days, but they're hoping that this will be the best booster, So get vaccinated, then get COVID, okay? If you do it the other way around, you've got 30 times the risk of death you've got 10 times the risk of hospitalization, you've got long COVID, you've got a genetic material going all over your body that's self-replicating. You've got the worst of both worlds. If you get vaccinated by the virus, you are much more likely to have a much worse outcome than if you get vaccinated first by the vaccine. And then if you get a subsequent infection with the virus, well, that could be the silver lining because it will give you that. Yeah. The one other big benefit is the two other big benefits, aside from much less likely to have severe disease, is the slowing down. You're less likely to get it infected each time you're exposed if you have been vaccinated. And the other thing is, if you get vaccinated by the vaccine, you can't pass that on to someone else immediately. And
you can't pass the.
You can't. If you get vaccinated,
yeah.
Okay, and if you get immune, a vaccinated person cannot pass on COVID to anyone else, because when you get vaccinated, if they subsequently get exposed to someone who's got COVID, but the vaccine is not a virus.
Right. So you can't pass on the virus through the vaccination.
You cannot pass on the virus through
purely by being vaccinated.
Impossible. Right. It's because it's this the only thing in the vaccine is this 4,000 word pamphlet that describes part of the spike. So it's not a virus. It's not self-replicating. So you cannot get it.
But I just want us to be really clear there that you're saying that vaccinated, exposed to the virus, you may still contract the virus. Right?
Well, yes.
And that may have the ironic benefit of further immunity for you down the track.
Yeah. Well, not ironic. In fact, it could be, it looks like, and Singapore is this perfect example of, we'll soon find out. Soon in the next, it's hard to know how long, but we'll find out whether, in fact, the virus is the best booster to vaccination. It might, and that might be, and there's this, people are wishing and hoping that might be the best booster, but you don't want to get the virus first because of the outcomes.
Because Rob, that's the natural next question, isn't it? Yep. For people that say, and let's look at our membership now, firefighters, when they are employed as professional firefighters, for example, are in the top 15-10% of the fittest, healthiest people in the world. So I'm a fit, healthy firefighter. I look after myself. I eat well. I don't smoke. I keep fit. Mm-hmm. I pretty much handle viruses pretty well. Why would I not want to explore the fact that I could develop natural immunity by being exposed to the virus and not having to be vaccinated? That would be a natural question, I think. Okay, so
I'm not trying to be funny here, but do firefighters have mothers and fathers and grandparents?
And children.
And children and relatives, some of whom are not well. So for a fit, healthy person in their 20s, how old are these? What are their ages?
Well, firefighters, we've even got some on the truck still in their 70s, but they, it's a bit like the general population. Probably the bulk are in the 35 to 55 bracket. Yeah.
45 to 55.
Yeah, 35 to 55.
35 to 55. Yeah. Well, the majority of them, if they get vaccinated by the virus with genetic material going all over their body, self-replicating, just remember this, they personally, most of them might be okay, most of them. But if they have any relatives, younger or older, now, more than 1 in 100 children who get infected end up in hospital.
Wow.
Of 30 to 35 to 55-year-olds, well over 1 in 100 will end up in hospital. It's hard. The effect of age is huge. So every 5 years, the risk goes up significantly. Compared to the vaccine, it's a complete no-brainer. There is estimated to be 1 vaccine-related death per 10 million jabs of the Pfizer vaccine. There's a lot of misinformation out there about these other deaths. It's all wrong. It's all wrong. I can tell you. 1 death. And what happens when you get, whether it's the Pfizer or the other vaccines, the deaths and those who get hospitalized is not because of the vaccine itself. The vaccine is not anything. It's because when you prod the immune system, some people overreact more than others. And interestingly, when I talk to the immunologists, the specialists who work in this area about immune responses, they tell me that the people who react strongly to the vaccine are the people who would have died if they'd got the virus. Because even when you get the virus has 2 effects. One, it makes your cells sick because it takes over the whole machinery, makes lots of more virus. Okay. But the other thing it does is it stimulates your immune system and it overreacts. And if you're stimulating the immune system because you've got billions of cells that have been infected, some people overreact. So, you might have heard about the myocarditis. That's what people talk about, the myocarditis. Yeah. Well, there's something like, even in fit, healthy young men, is that you're 10 times more likely to get myocarditis and heart problems if you get the virus than if you get the vaccine. Okay, so these are young men.
Yeah. If you look on the government website, so we've been trying to only point people to a place of truth, right? And a guarantee. But so even if you look at the government website and the information it's got about the Pfizer, it has some precautionary wording, and there's precautions around people taking blood thinners, pregnant or breastfeeding mothers. Where does this fit in terms of the data that you're talking about that shows the risks are weighed the other way?
So the blood thinners, so if you're on, so it's not saying you shouldn't take it. In fact, we believe that the latest evidence suggests that there might be 100 people in New Zealand who have a contraindication to taking Pfizer, a total of 100 people. And that's approximate. And they will know who they are, because the people who should not take the Pfizer vaccine are those who react to the specific fat that each of the particles is wrapped in. And Pfizer chose a fat that's the common ingredient of most soaps and moisturizers and things. So people who have who are allergic to that, they will know it, because this stuff is everywhere. So that's the only group where there's like 100% contraindication. It's tiny. Okay, the people who are on blood thinners, what we believe, what we advise is that when you inject it, you hold, after you take it out, you keep pressure on it for a period of minutes, and you watch that patient. So you're only worried about them possibly having a bleed, but it's very rare. The other group, so that's not a reason for not taking it. You just have to be cautious. The other group who should definitely not have a second dose are those who, after their first dose, get what we call an anaphylactic reaction. So these are the people where you need an EpiPen. Okay, so there's a very occasional group of people who get this anaphylactic reaction. And of course, every vaccination site place in the country has these EpiPens on available, and there has not been one person's life lost from COVID from anaphylactic reaction. But that person, and you only know after they've had the first one, should not have the second one. So possibly 100, that might even be the maximum. Now, you talked about pregnancy. In fact, women who are pregnant should definitely go and get the vaccine. Women and men and women who are wanting to conceive should definitely go and get the vaccine. Those wordings on there, that's a pretty standard wording on everything. But if you talk to the obstetricians and gynecologists around the world, if you look at the royal colleges around the world, they definitely say you should be vaccinated, because the worst thing for a pregnant woman is if you get the virus, the potential for that to go right through your system, okay? So if you talk to the heads of the New Zealand College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, they say go out and get vaccinated.
So one of the questions, and I'm conscious of the time, because people will be watching this, and we're not going to get through everything, but
no.
There's just a couple of some interesting questions that we got that I think is relevant to some of the things you've been saying. One is the spike protein has been shown to cause asbestosis like lung disease, which of course is a massive problem.
Not true, false.
Not true?
No, that's complete rubbish.
Okay.
It's actually, asbestosis is caused by fibers, very fine fibers.
Yes.
Okay. These are external fibers that go into your lungs, into the airways. The spike protein is on a completely different scale in terms of size, and it's on the surface of a virus. It's not a particle that's in your lungs. Complete balderdash. That's one of the many complete. I get these every day, but yeah.
Yeah, no, handy. What would you say to someone who states that the Pfizer vaccine is still on trial until 2023?
Well, that's wrong as well. So what happened with the Pfizer vaccine is when we make any drugs, whether they're vaccines or other drugs, they have to go through a whole series of studies. There's two big limiting steps to how quickly that happens. One, the main one is money, is that it takes a long time usually to get sufficient people into your trials to do them quickly, okay? And money is the biggest thing. Now, what happened with the vaccines is that countries poured billions and billions of dollars into it, including Donald Trump, who actually put more money into vaccines than any other government. Donald Trump, and most of his supporters are anti-vaccine, but he put more money into vaccines than anyone else in the world. Now, the second problem, even if you've got enough money, is actually finding enough patients to use it on. And what we sadly, good for the studies, but bad for people, is that there were millions of people out there getting COVID. So we had billions of dollars and lots of people. And so the studies that have been done on the vaccines are right through, they've completed their trials, okay? And the other thing that is key is that with over 100 years of research onto vaccines, is that all of the side effects that have been found related to vaccines happen within the first few weeks, maximum first few months. And I saw there was some question about long-term effects. That's another misinformation. That is misinformation. The stuff about people talk about autism and stuff like that, that's been completely debunked. So the Pfizer vaccine is right through the FDA, completely through the FDA process, and it's because lots of money and lots of cases. And so, look, but it doesn't matter what drug there is. We never stop looking at drugs. 10, 20, 30 years later, we're still looking at drugs and side effects. But the Pfizer vaccine has gone through the whole process. In fact, it is the one vaccine that has gone all the way, really. Oh, actually, AstraZeneca is probably pretty close behind it, and then Moderna. But there's more evidence on the Pfizer vaccine than any other vaccine for COVID.
One of the it's an evolving situation, and we're all learning more, and including, the results from the various countries and their strategies and the impacts that is having. We've moved a little bit in New Zealand. We originally were getting our first and second shots 3 weeks apart. Then we moved to 6 weeks. Then we came back to 3 weeks. Now, some of that was due to, I think, promotion of the vaccination rates and how many we had here and all the rest of it. But so what is the optimum point of different time between your first and second shot?
Yeah. So just to say, so we started at 3 weeks.
Yeah.
3 to 4 weeks. And that's because that's what the main data from the trials came from. So the main data from the trials was they did 3 to 4 weeks. They'd done previous early studies suggesting that that's probably the ideal. Then there was some suggestion from post-trial data that maybe a little bit longer. And in fact, the reason we went to a bit longer was because we had a shortage of supply. So it was a combination of a shortage of supply and maybe the evidence suggesting it's longer. And then when we got the supply back, it was sort of, well, maybe a bit less, okay? And then, of course, we've had our outbreak, and so they've gone back to 3 weeks. So does it make much difference? It's not a big difference. The absolute ideal, perfect situation, maybe 5 to 6 weeks. The difference between 5 to 6 weeks and 3 weeks, pretty tiny, and particularly for severe disease. For severe disease, 3 weeks is absolutely fine. For infection at all, which I said is that, that's something that is waning, maybe a bit longer. But materially and from a clinical point of view, doesn't really matter.
So a lot of our members were in group 2. That meant that they were able to get their first vaccination shot in probably April, May, right? By the time it actually happened. We're now in late October. So how effective will those vaccinations, the second shot, let's say they had the second shot in May, how effective will those vaccinations still be?
Against severe disease, just as effective as soon after. Against getting infected, which, as we said, was potentially a silver lining, which could be the booster, it's less. So against severe disease, that stays. It's against whether they get infected or not. And that does lead me into a very important issue because, okay, now I'm a big proponent of mandates, widespread mandates, as far and as wide, for one reason. I hate mandates. They are an imposition on our personal freedoms. I totally acknowledge that. But I believe, based on the evidence that we're seeing around the world still, is that we're in a race against time. We in New Zealand are in a race against time. We still have a large proportion of our most vulnerable populations unvaccinated. And I believe that we are in serious risk of our whole hospital system being completely overburdened. And my colleagues, you just look in the paper today, that in the Herald, the perfect storm is that my colleagues in ICU and in hospitals all over the country are scared. I was going to say shitless, but I can't say that on this, can I? But
yes, you can.
I can. My colleagues are scared shitless because COVID, because it's so rampant, because it is so infectious, that 6 to 36 to 200 and something to 1,200, that widespread, rapid spread is what is freaking out my colleagues around the country. And we're just holding at the moment in New Zealand, in Auckland, we're just holding. And so the only way, can I just say, sorry, but the only way to protect ourselves against an overwhelmed health system is vaccination or complete lockdown. So there's two ways. There's two ways. If we completely lock down, go back into level 4 plus, because what that does, if you do it properly, it separates the infected people from the uninfected people. But New Zealanders have made it absolutely clear to the Prime Minister that they can't handle lockdowns for much longer. So the only other way to manage a disaster in New Zealand is to get as many people vaccinated as possible. And the international evidence is so clear that the fastest way to get the majority of the public vaccinated is vaccine mandates. So that's my only reason for pushing mandates, is because this is not about right and wrong. This is about life and death. Okay. And so I hate mandates. I don't want your personal freedom to be, reduced, but I don't want you to die. And as a public health doctor, every death out there is my failure because you are my patients. And so I'm pushing mandates because I believe we are in a life and death situation. 130,000 deaths in the UK. Last year, 1 in 10 deaths was from COVID. Okay, 1 in 10. It amplifies the death rate in every age group by 10%. So there's, for every 10 deaths, doesn't matter what age group, there's one more. On average, it takes 10 years of life. Someone who dies from COVID, on average, in the UK last year, lost 10 years of life. 10 years of life. This is the most serious threat to public health in a century. This is way beyond anything we've seen in a century. But in New Zealand, we've lived in a paradise. This is a Shangri-La. We've had 28 deaths because we've had 5,000 or 6,000 cases of COVID completely. We're living in this paradise, but we could lose everything that we gained if we don't. But we could be the win-win-win. Okay, we won last year. If we all get vaccinated, we can win this year. People will die. I will tell you, people will die. I'm afraid to say that that's going to happen. More people will die. But we could keep that to an absolute minimum if we get double jabbed.
I've got one last question, really on a topic that we haven't covered yet.
Yep.
And that's around treatment of COVID-19.
Yep. Okay.
And that's going to be a big thing for us in New Zealand, because we are going to expect, if this goes to the plan that you've laid out, we are going to expect people to, a huge number of people to contract COVID, but to be able to manage it at home, hopefully.
Yep.
So what are the treatment options? And, we've got words like ivermectin and stuff like that floating around. What's happening in that space? Okay.
So just to give you an analogy that I think your members are used to, because you often are the first people on the scene with road traffic crashes. Is that true?
Right. Yeah, medical response, all sorts
medical response. Very good. So seatbelt legislation, which was brought in by colleagues of mine, more doctors. So mandatory seatbelts was brought in to reduce the injuries you get. Not perfect, but it reduces the injuries. So vaccination is like a vaccination mandate is like compulsory seatbelts, but some people will still, despite the seatbelt, will still need treatment. And the treatments. So ivermectin is currently being trialed. They're doing a trial of ivermectin in Oxford, the University of Oxford. Right? Colleagues of mine are running this trial to see if this drug, which has worked for other diseases, works for COVID. The evidence that it works for COVID is actually not there. And I saw some of these questions, some of the points in the questions. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's not based on trials. These are not based on trials of COVID, but there are now rapid trials going on. The other drug, in fact, the most effective drug that's been shown for COVID is steroids, simple, cheap steroids, because a lot of the problems, a lot of the reaction that people have to COVID is actually your body's immune system overreacting to it. And steroids, these simple, common, cheap drugs, have been a revelation for many people. They've had a major impact. And overall, they probably reduced the death rate, which last year was 1 in 100. If you look at the whole population, I saw some comments in there about how little it was. Those are completely wrong. Those statements about how rare it is. On average last year, in a whole population, if you take all ages, it was about 1 in 100 people who got COVID died. Steroids have had a huge impact. And then there are these other modern drugs which are coming in. But just remember, if our health system gets completely overwhelmed by all of these cases, we won't have the clinical staff to give these drugs. So what we want to do is to get everyone vaccinated so that the people who still get infections and still get severe disease will be able to benefit from these new drugs. And if ivermectin works, that will be coming because the trials are happening rapidly. There are a number of other drugs that are being proposed at the moment, and there's trials going on all over the world to see how effective these drugs are. So, that's the other great benefit about New Zealand, is that because we managed to keep it out for so long, we have the ability to learn about the best treatments next year. But I'm just really, really concerned, and it's what wakes me up at 3:30 every morning for the last 6 weeks, or actually much longer, ever since Delta, been waking up, is will we get enough sufficient numbers of people vaccinated that we will have the hospital staff and the hospital beds to treat them.
And to treat every other normal.
And yes, well, look, I mean, and all of the, the burns units, I mean, there'll be no burns units if our hospitals are overrun. So you guys deal with burns, you deal with all sorts of injury. Those units are going to be under severe stress if our hospitals are filled with COVID patients, because every COVID patient takes up at least 2 to 3 times the work of someone without COVID, because you have to be in full gear, you have to keep them away from everybody. So yeah, absolutely. So if you're concerned, which obviously about getting the people that you see who need to be in hospital, you want to see them getting treated, we need to keep the COVID patients out. And there's no one going to be standing there if someone presents with COVID, no one's going to say you can't come in, because that's not how New Zealanders work. We don't have a gatekeeper at the front of our hospitals and say, can you pay, or do you deserve this? We will always in our hospitals take everybody. So in order for us to continue to take everybody, we need to all be double jabbed. And my goal is 100% of All Blacks, 98% of people in Canberra, 96% of people in Queenstown have had at least one jab. So we're getting up there. So why can't all New Zealanders get double jabbed? And if all New Zealanders who meet the criteria, why can't we? Because if we do, our hospitals will be able to take all of the other people who we need.
Thank you very, very much, Rod. I think we didn't religiously go through the questions, but we've covered a lot of the topics that were in those questions. And I think in particular, your explanation of the virus and how the vaccination works will be really useful information for people, no matter where they fit on the mandatory vaccination scale.
Yeah, and I'm happy to help with other questions. If you've got specific questions, I just hope that, that has helped. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for people who have hung in there and are still watching. I know that's been a long haul, but I hope this has been some help to you. And you can always contact us. You can always contact us at the NZPFU if you want to explore this topic more, or you want us to do something else in order to explore this topic more. Thanks very much. Thanks, Rod. Thanks, Jaren.